I was still in my wedding dress when the lawyer closed the door and locked it. Not gently. Not politely. His hand shook just enough that I noticed, and then he cleared his throat like he needed a second to remember how to breathe. "I need you to listen very carefully," he said, lowering his voice even though we were alone. "If you sign anything else today, you could lose your marriage, your name, and every dollar your father ever set aside for you." For a moment, the room felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in to hear that sentence too. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I just nodded once, because panic wastes time, and time was suddenly the most expensive thing I owned. An hour earlier, I had been standing under white lights and fake flowers, smiling for cameras, thinking my biggest worry was whether my vows sounded rehearsed. My husband, Daniel, had squeezed my hands like he always did when people were watching. Warm. Confident. Convincing. Everyone loved him. My friends said I was lucky. My father said Daniel was solid, dependable, good with numbers. What no one said out loud was that Daniel liked control more than comfort, and money more than peace. I knew that. I just didn't know how far he'd already gone. The lawyer, Michael Harris, slid a thin folder across the table instead of opening it. "Your stepmother brought me in last night," he said. "Emergency review. She said it was routine." It wasn't. The word routine hung there like a bad joke. My stepmother, Karen, loved that word. She used it for everything she didn't want questioned. Routine transfers. Routine updates. Routine signatures. After my mother died, Karen had stepped into our lives wearing calm like armor. She organized my father's accounts, consolidated assets, created trusts she said were for protection. Over time, protection turned into permission. I asked Michael one question. "Is my father okay?" He paused before answering, which told me more than his words did. "He's alive," he said carefully. "But he's not the one making decisions anymore." I left the office 10 minutes later and walked back into my reception like nothing had happened. Music. Laughter. Champagne flutes clinking. Daniel spotted me immediately, relief flashing across his face before he masked it. "There you are," he said. "Karen was looking for you." Of course she was. Karen always knew when something shifted, even before she knew why. She kissed my cheek, her perfume sharp and familiar, and pressed a pen into my hand. "Just one last thing for the bank," she said lightly. "Wedding paperwork." "Boring stuff." I smiled and handed the pen back. "Not today," I said. Her eyes narrowed for half a second. "Just enough." That night, after the guests left and the dress was hung and the adrenaline finally drained, Daniel asked me why I'd been quiet. "You okay?" he said, already scrolling on his phone. I watched him the way I'd learned to watch people when I was younger, when reacting too fast meant losing ground. "Just tired," I said. He nodded, satisfied. People who believe they're winning don't ask follow-up questions. I didn't sleep. I replayed Michael's sentence again and again, stripping it down to its bones. Lose your marriage. Lose your name. Lose the money. Those weren't threats. They were facts, already in motion. Somewhere beneath the celebration, paperwork was moving faster than I was. Trusts amended. Waivers prepared. Signatures anticipated. Daniel had always said marriage was about building together. What he meant was access. At 3 in the morning, I opened the shared filing cabinet in our home office. I didn't rummage. I didn't rush. I photographed documents one by one, careful to put everything back exactly where it was. A marital trust I'd never been told about. A liability clause tied to my name. A loan secured against an account that should have been protected. The amounts made my stomach tighten. 6 figures. Then 7. This wasn't a mistake. It was a structure. The next day, Karen texted me like nothing was wrong. Heart emojis. Smiley faces. "So proud of you," she wrote. Daniel left early for work, kissed my forehead, told me we'd talk later. I called Michael from my car and told him I was ready to understand everything. He didn't rush me. "Good," he said. "Because the only way this ends well is if we move quietly." That was the moment I stopped thinking of myself as confused or betrayed and started thinking like someone who needed proof. I didn't confront. I didn't accuse. I collected. Every email. Every statement. Every signature. I let them believe I was distracted by newlywed life, by thank you cards and honeymoon plans. Calm is invisible. Calm is dangerous. And somewhere in the middle of pretending everything was fine, I realized something that steadied me completely. They thought the paperwork protected them. They never considered it might protect me too. The bank office smelled like toner and stale coffee, The kind of place where people came to ask for forgiveness from numbers that didn't care. The woman across the desk kept glancing at the door, fingers tapping a little too fast against a stack of printed statements. She didn't smile when she finally spoke. Her voice dropped instead, careful, professional, like she didn't want anyone else to hear it. "Mrs. Carter, there's a lien registered against assets tied to your trust. If it clears the audit, your accounts could be frozen within 10 business days." She slid the paper toward me, then stopped halfway, as if reconsidering whether I deserved to touch it yet. I didn't reach for it. Panic wastes time, and time was the only thing I still controlled. I nodded once, slow, like I was absorbing a weather report instead of a financial threat that could dismantle my future before the honeymoon photos even finished uploading. She added one more sentence, quieter than the first, almost apologetic. "Your name is on the liability waiver. That means the bank assumes consent." I remember thinking how strange it was that everything in my life was still technically intact, and yet something fundamental had shifted sideways, like a house after a minor earthquake. When I walked out, I didn't call Mark. I didn't call anyone. I sat in my car, hands resting calmly on the steering wheel, and let the shock finish passing through me. People think strength looks loud. They're wrong. Strength looks like staying still long enough to hear what the silence is trying to tell you. On the drive home, memories lined up without being invited. Not dramatic ones. Small, forgettable moments that suddenly had edges. Mark insisting we merge finances early because it's cleaner for taxes. Linda hovering during those conversations, pretending to scroll her phone while listening to every word. The way Mark used phrases like trust structure and asset efficiency with a confidence that sounded earned, not borrowed. At the time, I'd admired it. I grew up believing competence was safety. That belief hadn't failed me. People had. The house felt different when I walked in, like it knew something I didn't yesterday. Mark was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, acting normal, which was almost impressive given how much effort normalcy actually takes. He kissed my cheek, asked if the bank meeting went fine. I said, "Fine enough." It was the truth. Fine enough buys time. And time, when used correctly, turns into leverage. That night, while Mark slept beside me, breathing evenly, I lay awake counting details instead of sheep. The trust documents Linda had pushed at the wedding weren't ceremonial. They were operational. The language wasn't emotional, it was surgical. Irrevocable clauses. Third-party management. A waiver that quietly transferred authority without transferring visibility. I slipped out of bed just before dawn, padded into the office, and pulled up the copies I'd scanned weeks ago without fully understanding why. In the way he meant. Later that afternoon, I met my friend Rachel for coffee, the kind of friend who listens without interrupting and remembers details you forget you've shared. I didn't tell her everything. I told her enough. She frowned, not in fear, but in recognition. "That sounds like paper abuse," she said lightly, like it was a joke. It wasn't. Paper abuse is when systems are used to corner people without ever raising a voice. On the way home, my lawyer finally called back. His tone was different now, focused, awake. "Do not confront anyone," he said. "And don't sign anything. Not even something that looks harmless. Especially not that." I asked him if the waiver could hold. There was a pause. Papers shifting. A breath. "Only if you stay quiet," he said. That was when I understood the real game. Silence wasn't submission. It was camouflage. Over the next few days, microcracks appeared everywhere. A credit alert I hadn't triggered. A notification that a joint account had been used to secure a short-term loan I didn't recognize. Mark blamed a clerical error. Linda blamed the bank. Everyone blamed complexity. Complexity is just confusion wearing a suit. I kept my tone neutral, my questions sparse, my reactions boring. People reveal more when they think you're behind. One evening, while Mark showered, his phone buzzed on the counter. A name I didn't know. A message preview I didn't read fully, because I didn't need to. "It's done," it said. That was enough. I placed the phone back exactly where it was. Later, when Mark reached for me in bed, I let him. Not because I felt close, but because proximity makes people sloppy. If you're still with me right now, you already know this isn't about revenge the way movies sell it. This is about containment. About making sure the damage stops spreading before it reaches the parts of your life you can't rebuild. By the end of that week, I had a folder on my laptop labeled nothing. Inside it were copies, timestamps, bank notices, trust clauses, and one quiet understanding: whatever Mark and Linda thought they were doing, they'd done it assuming I would panic. I didn't. I prepared. And somewhere between the bank's lowered voice and my lawyer's careful pause, I realized something else too. The system that had been used to trap me could also be used to expose them. It just needed patience. By the third week after the wedding, the quiet stopped feeling peaceful and started feeling deliberate. That's usually the moment people make mistakes, when silence feels like safety and routine pretends nothing has changed. I didn't fall for it. I noticed how Mark started taking calls in the garage instead of the living room, how his phone stayed face down now, how numbers replaced names in his recent calls. I noticed how Linda stopped mentioning the trust entirely, as if pretending it never existed could erase it from paper. And I noticed something else that didn't sit right: the bank statements stopped arriving by mail. They switched to digital without my request. That alone told me someone had been inside my accounts. I didn't confront anyone. Confrontation gives warnings. I logged into the bank portal from a separate device and found a newly added authorized financial liaison listed under my profile, a role I had never assigned. The name wasn't Mark's. It belonged to a firm I didn't recognize, a mid-sized advisory group based out of Phoenix. I didn't panic. Panic wastes leverage. I called the bank, asked for verification, and listened carefully as the representative's tone shifted from routine to guarded. She confirmed that the authorization had been submitted with a notarized consent form bearing my signature. I thanked her, asked for a copy, and ended the call before she could apologize. The signature looked like mine at first glance. Same slant, same spacing. But it was traced, not written. Whoever did it had studied me, but not closely enough. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about control. I showed nothing at home. I smiled, cooked dinner, laughed at the right moments. Mark watched me the way people do when they're checking if a lie is still holding. That night, while he slept, I pulled the trust documents from my encrypted drive and read every clause again, slowly, carefully. Clause 14 referenced a contingency waiver tied to marital status. Clause 19 allowed temporary fiduciary delegation under spousal necessity. That phrase hadn't bothered me before. Now it sat heavy. Temporary could become permanent if paired with the right paperwork and enough time. I scheduled a consultation with a forensic accountant the next morning under my maiden name. Her office smelled like toner and burnt coffee, and she didn't waste time pretending this was unusual. She showed me a pattern I hadn't seen yet: small transfers, 5 figures at a time, routed through advisory fees and administrative costs, just under the threshold that triggers automatic audits. Smart. Patient. Arrogant. She circled a number on the screen and slid it toward me. $187,000 had already moved. Not stolen. Repositioned. The word mattered legally. I thanked her, paid in cash, and left without asking her opinion. Opinions create assumptions. Facts create cases. On my way home, my phone buzzed with a message from Linda. She wanted lunch. Public. Friendly. I agreed. She chose a place with white tablecloths and too much glass, the kind of restaurant where voices carry and people perform civility. She talked about family optics, about how good it was that everything had settled down, about how money complicates love if you let it. I let her talk. When she mentioned that Mark had always been so responsible with finances, I watched her eyes, not her mouth. That's where people slip. She already knew. Later that week, Mark asked me to sign something. He said it was routine, an update requested by the trust's administrative office, nothing urgent. He set the paper down between us and pushed a pen toward my hand like it was casual. It wasn't. The header was real. The formatting was correct. The danger sat in the second paragraph, where language blurred ownership and access. I told him I'd review it later. His smile tightened for half a second before he recovered. That half second told me everything. That night, I forwarded the document to my lawyer without comment. She replied with one sentence that didn't need explanation: "Do not sign this under any circumstance." I slept well after that. The next morning, I received a call from the advisory firm in Phoenix. The man on the line spoke confidently, like someone used to being deferred to. He referenced my verbal consent, mentioned timelines, suggested efficiency. I told him all communication should be routed through my attorney. He paused, then adjusted his tone. That pause was the sound of recalculation. By the end of the week, the false supporter revealed herself without realizing it. A mutual friend casually mentioned that Mark had been stressed about my money, phrased like concern, disguised as loyalty. That's how leaks happen. I thanked her and stopped sharing anything personal after that. People show you who they work for when they think you're not watching. By then, the picture was clear. They weren't rushing. They were waiting for me to get comfortable, to sign something out of trust, to let marriage blur boundaries that paper does not forgive. I wasn't angry. Anger is loud and short-lived. I was methodical. Every document they touched, I duplicated. Every call they made, I logged. Every assumption they relied on, I let stand, because systems don't collapse when you fight them, they collapse when you let them run exactly as designed, right into their own records. And somewhere between those quiet mornings and carefully staged dinners, I understood something else with perfect clarity. They thought the hardest part was already over. They believed the wedding had closed the deal. What they didn't realize was that part 3 is where people like me stop reacting and start positioning. I never imagined that a single whispered word at a wedding could spiral into something so calculated, so meticulous. But by the time I picked up the phone that morning, my life was already moving through channels I hadn't fully revealed to anyone, not even Mark. The lawyer's message pinged softly, almost innocuously, check the amended clause before noon. Everything depends on it. A chill ran down my spine, but my face remained calm. I had rehearsed this inner restraint for months. Panic wasted nothing but time. And time, in my hands, was leverage. Linda's glare at the breakfast table lingered longer than social politeness allowed. Her words from the altar, calling me adopted, echoed in my mind with surgical precision. She believed the humiliation was hers to control, but she had no idea the quiet preparations underway. Mark, sitting opposite, sipped his coffee casually, oblivious or feigning it. Either way, I noted every micro-expression, every slight frown. These small signals were the breadcrumbs I would follow later, a map of human error and arrogance. By mid-morning, the bank conference call began. I sat in the corner of my home office, laptop open, documents lined precisely, trust statements, amendment clauses, signature timelines, audit trails. My eyes scanned the numbers. Hidden fees totaling $42,750 had been quietly rerouted through a shell account. Nothing overt, nothing dramatic, just a slow bleed designed to be invisible. I smiled faintly, taking note of the timestamp discrepancy, perfect leverage. The lawyer, Joanna Mitchell, joined the video feed. Calm, deliberate, almost clinical. Her presence alone carried authority, and I felt a quiet surge of relief knowing she had meticulously recorded every meeting, every verbal slip that could be weaponized later. Hannah, she said softly, the clause is modified, but the signatures from the prior trustee are irregular. We need to document the discrepancy immediately. Her trembling hand held the folder visible to the camera, a subtle yet potent signal. One wrong move from the opposing side, and their strategy would crumble. Flashback, months ago, Mark had suggested hiring a wedding planner to smooth over family tensions. I had agreed, but only as a veneer. Behind the scenes, I had instructed the planner to note interactions, overheard words, subtle shifts in behavior. Each interaction with Linda, each friendly remark, was quietly logged. Even her seemingly inconsequential smiles became evidence when paired with financial documentation. Mark joked once, "You're paranoid," but I just smiled. Paranoia, in my world, was just a word for preparedness. By noon, subtle micro-twists began cascading. A misfiled document by Linda's assistant, a casual comment about the adoption trust sent to the wrong email chain, and an overlooked clause amendment, all invisible to the casual eye but glaring to mine. Each incident, when combined with Joanna's recordings, was a thread. Individually, they were minor, together, they formed a tapestry of inevitable exposure. Lunch brought a brief pause, but not distraction. I met my mother, who instinctively understood my silence. "Patience is your weapon," she whispered, squeezing my hand. Her reassurance was grounding, a mirror to the calm exterior I had to maintain for Mark, for the wedding guests, for anyone who might stumble into my orbit unaware. Emotional manipulation was a game, and I was the only player aware of the rules. Back at the office, I reviewed financials once more. Hidden liabilities totaling $15,600 had been diverted to an account under a pseudonym, a classic micro-twist waiting for court exposure. I flagged it. Joanna nodded over video, her expression unreadable but approving. "This one will be the domino," she said. Calm, precise. Not celebratory. That was the tone that carried power. The afternoon faded, but tension did not. Linda attempted a casual phone call to Mark, words dripping with feigned warmth. I intercepted the subtle gaslighting attempt silently, noting timestamps, vocal inflections, and infrequent pauses. I logged every detail. It was no longer a social slight, it was evidence in motion. By then, the foundation for the slow collapse of her facade was solidifying. Evening arrived, and I returned to the living room, arranging documents like chess pieces. My cat brushed against my leg, a brief grounding touch. Mark finally asked, "Everything okay?" I nodded, voice measured. "Yes, just reviewing some details." He didn't know that by tonight, Joanna had compiled a full dossier, every misstep, every hidden clause, every lie, recorded and timestamped. I glanced at the calendar. Tomorrow would require careful maneuvering. The dinner invitation from Linda, a seemingly benign gesture, was laced with opportunity. One wrong word, one careless smile, and the documentation would shift from silent proof to public reckoning. My strategy remained calm, controlled, and invisible to her. This was no longer personal. It was procedural justice, slow burn and inevitable. The last rays of sun filtered through the blinds, and I sat back, reviewing the chain of micro-twists, hidden debt, misfiled documents, forged signatures, ally observation, silent recording, public exposure potential. Each linked to the next like carefully placed dominoes. The calm control I felt contrasted sharply with the chaos I had engineered to unfold in the coming days. Mark finally joined me on the couch, a glass of water in hand. I offered a faint smile. "Patience," I said softly. "They always make their own mistakes." His eyes met mine briefly, perhaps sensing the underlying calculation but not the full extent. I allowed the ambiguity. It served the plan. Night fell, and I prepared for bed. Every document was aligned. Every recording backed up twice, every observation catalogued. In the quiet, I acknowledged a subtle sense of satisfaction. The slow, patient build-up, the meticulous layering of reality, and the tactical collection of micro-evidence had reached a critical mass. Tomorrow, the next dominoes would fall, but tonight, peace, dignity, and control were mine. I slipped under the covers, letting the quiet settle, letting the tension simmer invisibly. The foundation was complete, the strategy unbroken, and the micro-twists were ready to cascade in ways that Linda would never predict. The calm exterior hid a system-driven, precise, unstoppable momentum. Patience, I whispered to myself, is power. And the power of quiet observation is lethal. I woke that morning with a calm I hadn't felt in years, the kind of stillness that only comes after the storm has been meticulously mapped in one's mind. The faint click of the lock on my office door reminded me that the world outside could rage, but inside the space, every document, every recorded message, every time-stamped ledger entry, was mine to wield. Joanna's call yesterday still echoed in my memory. "Hannah, if these signatures are challenged, your entire trust could unravel." Her hands trembled, the file slamming shut almost inaudibly, and for a split second, I felt the weight of the system itself teetering. Then I breathed. Mark's presence was a silent reassurance. He never spoke over my thoughts, never questioned my pacing. He had been there through every calculated pause, every subtle confrontation. I remembered the first time he had watched Linda's whisper at the altar, the word adopted curling off her tongue like a dagger, thinking it harmless. That tiny sting had launched the chain of careful preparation, and now, years of patience had distilled into clarity. I spread the latest set of documents across the table, a revised audit showing hidden transfers of $87,500 in escrow accounts. Letters from bank officials confirming misdirected funds, the notarized amendments to the trust with dates and signatures validated by Joanna herself. Every line, every annotation was a micro-twist waiting to unfold. I smiled faintly, recalling the countless hours of silent observation, Linda's social maneuvers, her false smiles, the way she believed subtlety would shield her from scrutiny. The first domino fell when Joanna arrived in person that afternoon. She didn't knock. The lock clicked, the polished shoes echoed across the hardwood, and her face was set with the rare combination of legal authority and genuine concern. "Hannah, the court will want to see this today," she said, voice steady yet grave. My heart didn't flutter, though a shiver of satisfaction ran through me. Finally, the invisible hand of the law would move. Mark stayed behind the velvet drapes, silent witness. Even he could feel the quiet collapse that had been in motion for months. Linda had no clue. The letters, the hidden bank memos, the audit discrepancies, all pointed directly back to her. The text messages she had thought casual, the phone call misdirections, every whisper of power she wielded, were now part of the evidence chain. We arrived at the courthouse, the polished floors reflecting sunlight like a silent witness. The judge, a poised woman with an acute awareness of both law and nuance, gestured for us to proceed. Joanna laid the documents carefully on the bench, $620,000 in trust mismanagement, multiple unsigned waivers, 3 separate audit reports showing discrepancies over 6 months, and emails from Linda attempting to retroactively modify clauses without notice. Linda entered, flawless on the surface. Her smile faltered when the clerk called her to review the case. Every step she took betrayed a hidden panic she couldn't articulate. Her whisper from the wedding day, once aimed to humiliate me publicly, now seemed small and powerless against the wall of structured evidence. I watched from the corner of the courtroom, calm as the tide, letting every detail play out. Joanna guided me through questions, highlighting signatures and pointing out timestamps. Each revelation drew gasps from the gallery, subtle but undeniable proof of deception. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need drama. The law, the documents, the system itself, did the talking. A final micro-twist surfaced, one email chain showing a misappropriation of $42,750, sent to the wrong party, timestamped just after Linda had celebrated the wedding's public display of power. This small error, invisible to anyone else, tied directly to every other breach. The judge's pen moved deliberately, noting each infraction, each failure of due diligence. Linda's composure cracked only at the end, when the settlement clause was enforced. The judge's voice was calm, almost detached. The trust and assets shall remain with the rightful beneficiary. Any attempts to circumvent this ruling will be met with full legal recourse. A silence settled in the room, not dramatic, not theatrical, just the quiet satisfaction of justice, methodical and undeniable. Walking out, Mark by my side, the weight lifted. The world had been righted, not by confrontation, not by shouting, but by strategy, patience, and meticulous preparation. Joanna's last words in the lobby, almost conversational, "You didn't scream. You won." And she was right. That night, at home, the documents filed, the devices packed away, I sat by the window. Moonlight traced the outline of my desk, the same desk where months ago I had first seen the trust discrepancies. For the first time in years, the chaos of manipulation, betrayal, and silent gaslighting felt like a memory I could observe without panic. Mark brewed coffee in the kitchen, a small smile on his face. We were not rich. We were free. Freedom, I realized, wasn't a sudden windfall. It was the quiet control over one's life, the security of knowledge, and the peace of knowing that the system had worked, and that no whisper of malice could undo it. Linda, now isolated and accountable, would carry the weight of her own miscalculations. And I, finally, could move forward without fear, without deception, and with dignity intact.